president wants to spy on 200 million Americans without a warrant. Has he read this document, which he was sworn to uphold?
Now, I will not have you libel Abraham Lincoln.
I don't understand the problem with registering guns. We register cars.
Mark Levine brings you the news the government doesn't want you to know.
Today, an explosive story about connections between white supremacists and Islamic terrorists.
When there's a conflict between Scalia's conservative values and the Constitution of the United States, he throws away the Constitution.
We do have secret prisons. That is not what America's all about.
Let's go to Mark in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Good evening, America. Welcome to The Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Mark Levine. My guest today is conservative commentator Chris Ullman, and we will definitely get to her in just a few minutes. But I want to talk at first about Syria. You may have seen Secretary of State John Kerry give a very forceful speech on television following the chemical attack on Syrian citizens by the Syrian government. No doubt the use of chemical weapons against Syria's own citizens is a violation of international law, but I want to go further than that. Because the United States is deciding what to do. Should we respond with cruise missiles? Should we not respond at all? Should we use boots on the ground? How about a no-fly zone? Should we arm the rebels? And if so, which rebels? What is the role of Russia or Turkey or Saudi Arabia? It's a very complex situation. So I want to take a little time and talk about a little bit of history before we begin and talk about the various United States options. So if we can show right here, this is a map of Syria. And as you can see, Syria borders some very important allies, the United States. If we can get the map up on the board. Syria borders Israel, our most important ally in the United States, in the Middle East. It borders Turkey, our NATO ally. Turkey, of course, is right here. It borders Iraq. You've heard a lot about Iraq. We've had a war there for several years. It borders Jordan, another very important, stable, relatively stable for an Arab monarchy, U.S. ally. And it borders Lebanon. Lebanon used to be the Paris of the Middle East, used to be a very peaceful, wonderful country where Christians lived in peace with Shia Muslims and Sunni Muslims. Lebanon is mostly known now for bombs and being ruled by a terrorist group named Hezbollah that's being funded by this country way over here, Iran. Down here is Egypt, which we've heard a lot about. Syria is not some out-of-the-way place. Syria is in the heart of the Middle East, surrounded by, as I said, very important U.S. allies, Israel, Turkey, Jordan, the country of Iraq, which many Americans, whether or not you agree with the war, and I was against it, but thousands of Americans fought and died in Iraq. Tens of thousands are wounded. We still have 50,000 troops there. It's a very strategically important place. Now, how did Syria get into this mess? Where did it all come from? Syria was a product of the Ottoman Empire. Syria, like so much of the Middle East, was a back province of Turkey up into World War I. From about the 1600s to the 20th century, all of what we might call the Middle East today, most of it was part of the Ottoman Empire under Turkish rule. Turkey was part of World War I. They were with Germany. They lost the war, so they lost the spoils of war. They were shrunk to what is today the country of Turkey, and all their backwater provinces were divided, mostly by England and France. One of the reasons why the Middle East has very straight boundaries, if you look at the boundaries between Syria and Jordan, Iraq, you see a lot of straight lines, is because they don't reflect the ethnic realities of the region. You see, in Europe, you have a lot of squiggly lines, right? European lines are based on various ethnic groups. But in the Middle East, like in Africa, the colonials, they divided up the territory, and they didn't much go as to where the people lived, so much as where English and French interests lay. So, to understand what's going on in Syria, I have to give you first a tiny little bit of Islamic history. Trust me, I won't go on at length. I am not an expert in it. But there's two major types of Muslims in the world. There are other types as well. But the main division is among Sunni Muslims and Shia Muslims. Sunni Muslims are the majority. They're the majority among Arabs in the Middle East. Shia are the minority. Basically, it came down to a dispute over who would succeed the Prophet Muhammad after he founded the new religion, Islam, in the 7th century. But they've been disagreeing now for about 1400 years, sometimes violently, and they're two different sects of Islam. And like I said, they've had plenty of wars. Well, when the colonial powers divided up the Middle East, they divided up Iraq, which was a country with a Shia majority, but the leader was a Sunni leader. Syria is the opposite. Syria has a Sunni majority with a Shia leader. You can already see where the problems might lie. But basically, Syria was a relatively stable dictatorship, horrible to its own people, much like Saddam Hussein, much like Mubarak, other dictators in the region, totalitarian regime, brutal prisons, no free speech, but relatively stable, not much war, until the Arab Spring came along. And the people of the regions, throughout the region, in Tunisia and Egypt and in Syria and other countries, Libya, revolted against their leadership and wanted freedom, democracy, wanted the same kind of freedoms that we have in the United States. The people rose up against their leaders, and Bashar al-Assad, he's the current dictator of Syria, decided to beat down the rebellion quite forcefully. He massacred thousands of Syrian people. At that time, right here on this show, I argued 2 years ago that we needed to get involved. I thought we should do a no-fly zone, much like we did in Libya. I had a lot of sympathy for the Syrian people, and I wanted to be on the right side of history. I wanted America to support the populace and not the dictators. I get really tired of us supporting all those dictators throughout the globe. We did virtually nothing. President Obama came on TV and said Bashar al-Assad, the dictator of Syria, has to go. He said, and the only thing is if they cross the red line and use chemical weapons, then I'll be really upset. But other than that, he didn't do very much. And the Syrian army proceeded to massacre more than 100,000 innocent Syrian people. By that scale, it's already on the scale of the Rwandan genocide. Millions of refugees. The refugees are in Turkey, they're in Iraq, they're in Jordan, they're in Lebanon, and the war is continuing and has been going on for 2 years. It gets more complicated, unfortunately. At the beginning of the war, I think it's fair to say it was a battle between the Syrian government and the Syrian people. Today, it's much more complex than that, because many of the Shia Muslims in Syria are joining with the government. Many of the Sunni Muslims, the majority, are joining with the people. And because we didn't come in to help them, other people did, including the US sworn enemy, Al-Qaeda. There wasn't much Al-Qaeda in Syria 2 years ago. Now Al-Qaeda is forcefully in Syria, being armed by other countries like Saudi Arabia, again, our ally in the region, and they are on the Sunni side. Kind of weird. So you might think we should be on the Shia side, the side of the dictator, but the groups who support Assad are worse, dare I say, than Al-Qaeda. Is that possible? They are the Iranian theocracy, which of course is developing nuclear weapons, a very much a sworn in the United States, and Russia, which is funneling lots of arms into that region. So there are many people that would argue, given all of the international interests, given that it's practically a proto-world war going on with Russia and Iran and Saudi Arabia all there, Israel has taken a few strikes when they've gone into Israeli territory, Turkey's involved, that we should just stay out of the region entirely. Well, throw this in the mix. Just last week, another more than 1,000 innocent Syrian men, women, and children were gassed by some chemical weapon. There's an argument over whether it was mustard gas or sarin. Whatever it is, there's little dispute that the chemical weapons were used, and the Obama administration says it was a Syrian government that did it. So where do we go from here? Just a couple hours ago, Secretary of State John Kerry came on TV and delivered a very forceful response. So far, it's just words. The question is, what do we do next, if anything? And what's fascinating is liberals and conservatives are split on this question. I favor intervention. I favored intervention for 2 years now, but there are plenty of liberals that say, hey, after Iraq, after Afghanistan, we shouldn't have another war in the Middle East. Conservatives are split as well. Many of the conservatives that supported the war in Iraq are against doing any action in Syria, while others are condemning the President Obama, for inaction. We're going to find out where Chris Ullman stands in just a few minutes, and also where you stand if you want to call in and give us your 2 cents. Just dial in 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. So Chris, before we get into where you stand, how's my history lesson? Anything you dispute there? Did I miss anything?
I don't think so.
Okay,
it's pretty good.
I want to be fair. Okay, because Chris and I disagree on many things, but hopefully we can agree on the facts.
Yes.
So that's important. So, where would you go if you were advising the President of the United States?
Well, I think, and I may agree with you on this, that the president actually has let too much time go by without making a decision. You know, a year ago when he laid down his red line in the sand, but then did nothing about it. And now he's talking about, well, we have to see what the UN says, and he's calling up England, and he's calling up France, and what should they do? Are they going to be with us or not? before I tell the president what to do, I have a lot of questions I want him to answer. Number one, what is our goal? Is our goal to get rid of Assad and that's it? We've seen how that's worked in the past when we've gotten rid of one dictator we don't like and kind of left nothing going on there. What is the U.S. interest? Are we doing this to protect U.S. citizens from something, or is it a humanitarian thing? Is it possible to stabilize this region? I mean, just listening to everything that you said, Mark, I mean, my goodness, what difference are we going to make really? And if we get in, you know, I mean, you can look back at World War I and World War II, and we maybe didn't get in and on time, but what are we trying to accomplish here? And I don't think the president has laid that out for the American people. I don't think he's educated them the way you have just educated them about what is really going on here and what are our chances of success and what is success.
I think those are very fair questions, and I want to take the time. One of the nice things about having an hour show is we have the time to explore these questions. You raised some very, very good points. But one thing that surprises me, though, is that I opposed the war in Iraq and you supported it, and yet you're talking about going in the Middle East and a dictator and what comes afterwards. Iraq, unlike Syria, was not in the middle of a war when we intervened. Syria is in the middle of a war. Hundreds of thousands are dying. Millions are refugees. There's an urgency there. It does strike me as a little strange, and I'm just curious whether you think we've learned some lessons from Iraq. Would you do Iraq over again if you were in 03, 04?
I guess I saw more of a strategic interest.
What was that in Iraq? Because when you get to it in Syria, what was the strategic interest in Iraq? Was it oil?
Partially it was oil.
Okay.
And partially it was getting rid of a dictator who had already caused a lot of problems in the region that we had to go in before in Kuwait and deal with some of the stuff. We did have reports, and at the time, everybody agreed about weapons of mass destruction that were there, at least for a time. We were worried about that. Now, if we're worried about Syria possibly either striking Israel or one of our other allies with chemical weapons, or even gaining worse weapons from some of our other enemies in the area, then yes, that would be a very legitimate reason to go in.
Hold that point, because we're going to go to a break. But it just seems to me that listening to your own arguments for going into war in Iraq, I would argue, with the exception of oil, which may be the reason, but with the exception of oil, the arguments for Syria are better. We've got the same dictator gassing his own people, just as Saddam Hussein did, although Saddam Hussein had done it 15 years earlier and invaded Kuwait 12 years earlier. This is a current thing. And I would argue the threat of chemical weapons going to Hezbollah and other enemies that may well attack Israel, may well attack the United States, is severe. So I think based on your own argument for Iraq, I can make an argument for Syria, but I'm going to give you a chance to respond when we come back. If you want to dial in, it's 888-488-MARK.
Every year, 350,000 people are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Who will be their caregivers?
I am a caregiver.
Yo soy la que cuida a mi abuelo.
I'm a caregiver.
Call 1-800-437-2423 for a free brochure from Alzheimer's Disease Research on caring for those you care for the most. 1-800-437-2423.
I'm a caregiver. Mom, you really look good.
Not long ago, Albert couldn't take long walks. He was diagnosed with a bad heart. After considering all the treatment options, his heart specialist recommended a pacemaker instead of putting him to sleep. Get the facts.
again, the Inside Scoop, Virginia.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Mark Levine. I'm discussing with conservative Chris Ullman, and you, if you want to join the discussion, just give us a call, 571-749-1166 or 888-488-MARK, and give us your 2 cents on it. We're talking about the difficulties of what's going on in Syria. If you heard Secretary of State John Kerry today, you know that the United States is at a very firm decision point. President Obama's been putting it off for 2 years, but at this point, with the government having used chemical weapons against its own people, a decision will be made, and I'm quite confident that decision will be made within 1 week. The question is, what should that decision be? So, Chris, I basically took your argument to go into Iraq, and I would argue that every interest that you mentioned, with the exception of oil, applies in Syria in spades. What do you think?
Well, again, I think this president has a lot of explaining to do about what his motivations are and what is success. I think, in my view, and maybe I was being partisan, I think Bush explained what success was going to be, get rid of Saddam Hussein. What does Obama think success is in Syria?
I agree with you, he hasn't explained it.
He has not at all.
The only red line he set was chemical weapons. And I think he set that red line purposely.
And we know that happened way before the 21st.
Well, no, that's right. You're right. There were relatively small use of chemical weapons, probably killed dozens of people and not thousands of people a few months ago. But what I find interesting is that this line was set before any known use was used. It was set about a year ago. And really that was the only line he set. And to me, it was almost a wink and a nod. President Obama was saying, Bashar al-Assad, kill all the people you want, just don't use chemical weapons, and I'll leave you alone.
Exactly.
And I actually think he did so to give freedom to the Syrian dictator, because in my view, President Obama is a post-Iraq politician, a post-Afghanistan politician, so seared by, as many liberals were, as I was, by the war in Iraq, that he's really reluctant to get the United States involved, particularly in the Middle East. And more reluctant than Clinton or Bush, either side.
Exactly. And what I sense from what's going on, and I worry about what's happening, is that he is kind of reacting politically, and yet some Republicans are also kind of jumping in and trying to box him in politically, when we're talking about a conflict like this, let's put politics aside.
I completely agree with you. This is an issue of American interest, and not only that, but people don't usually vote on foreign policy anyway when it comes to elections. It should not be a Democratic-Republican issue.
We should hope that any president is acting in our best interest.
Absolutely.
And I think some of the Republicans are like trying to get him to do something or just say, you're not doing anything, but dude, don't do that.
Right. So let's talk about what our interests are. I would argue at the beginning, Obama really tried to basically stay out of it.
Right.
And then Assad, being the nasty, horrible dictator that he is, saw it as, I think Obama gave him a 90% green light, and he saw it as 100% green light. And then he even crossed the only red line Obama set. And he did chemical weapons small scale. That was about 6 months ago. And Obama still did nothing, waved his finger angrily, but still did nothing. And now he's doing it at a massive scale. And what I think Obama is learning the hard way, one could look at someone like Neville Chamberlain or something like else who learns it the hard way, is that when you give a really evil, nasty dictator a little bit of room, that they take more. And there's no doubt in my mind that Assad will not stop until the country is basically devoid of Sunni Muslims. They're all his allies. That would take basically the expulsion of tens of millions of people. Syria is a country of 22 million people. Some 80% are Sunni. If he's trying to change his whole country, it would be a massive humanitarian disaster. It would likely destabilize our allies in Turkey and in Jordan and in Iraq. And so I think he cannot be allowed to succeed. Now, what should be the goals? I'm fine with the goal of removing Bashar al-Assad. I don't think President Obama will set that goal. He said he has to go, but I don't think he'll say that's his goal. But I'll tell you something else. I'm also fine with working with the United Nations and working with England and France, as long as it's seen as a means to an end. The United Nations, we all know, Russia has a veto. Russia supports Assad. We're not going to get anything too dramatic out of them.
Right.
But when even Russia is saying don't use chemical weapons, and the United Nations inspectors go in, and then Assad bombards the area to hide the evidence, and apparently the UN inspectors today were even shot at. I don't know if you heard that.
Yes, I know.
At some point, it's saying to America, you have no credibility. If you don't act, you have no credibility, which is why I think we're going to act. Now, I fear it'll only be a few cruise missiles, but I think we're going to act.
Well, this brings up, I think, a larger, and maybe this is a political point, but the problem with Obama is he thought that he could ride on the coattails of America's standing in the world. Yeah. Unlike Bush, who said, you do this, that's it, and boom, Saddam Hussein did it, we went in and took him out. Here, Obama's like, well, hey, don't do that. And then Assad just basically gave him the finger. The UN is going to do...
Well, Saddam Hussein gave Bush the finger, too.
Yeah, and what did Bush do? He slapped him down, and he said,
I think
you know
you're going
what?
to see that in the next week.
No, I don't.
You're going to see something.
I worry that that's
We're
not
going to
going to
take
happen.
some military action. I would be shocked.
But why are we in the position we're in now? Because the president we elected wouldn't make the tough decision when it needed to be made. He put it off. He gave a red line. It was violated. He said, oh, not enough people. Even, I'm going to wait for other people. And Bush, that's why I supported Bush, because Bush said, don't do it. And I'm a parent. I know when you tell a kid, don't do it, and they do it, and you turn your back, you're going to get more of the same behavior. And that's where we are now, because this president would not step up to the line he said.
Well, we're going to see where he steps up. I would be shocked if we do nothing in the next week. I think we're going to do at least cruise missiles. I actually hope we do more. But you yourself said it's not just an issue of don't do this, we say no. It's an issue of, is it a wise thing to do? We have a lot of actors there. We have Al-Qaeda there now. They weren't there 2 years ago.
Right.
They are there now. We have
So inaction
Turkey.
has made things worse.
I agree with you. Inaction has made things worse. But we are where we are now.
Yeah.
So the question is what to do now. I have advocated for 2 years a no-fly zone. I actually supported, and I'd be curious to know if you did, I supported what we did in Libya. In Libya, the people were revolting against a dictator. We did not put boots on the ground, maybe a few hundred or something to help, but mostly no boots on the ground, no massive troops. Mostly we were helping the rebels overthrow a bad dictator, Gaddafi, and the Libyan government, it's weak. Libya's got trouble, but it's probably the most pro-American Arab government in the Middle East because we helped Libya overthrow. England and France were on board. Did you support our action in Libya?
Not completely, but then I look back and see what happened in Libya, and I wonder if they're really our friends when we had 4 Americans who were brutally killed in this country.
We did, but of course that wasn't the government of Libya that did that.
The government was completely in on that.
Oh, no, I don't think so at all.
Absolutely.
No, I think that was a militia group, Ansar al-Sharia, a terrorist group. The government is weak, but they're our friends. They were working with our ambassador, Stevens. Look, the government may be weak and may be incompetent, but I don't think they're anti-American, and I don't think at all the government was behind that attack.
Well, I just...
You feel free to disagree if you want.
I think that there is evidence that they did know. Maybe they knew and they tried to stop it and they were unable to.
I think they're weak, but I think they're very much pro-American. One of the interesting things about Libya is in every other Arab country in the Middle East, you have a choice between brutal secular dictators and Islamic fundamentalists who want to make the country a theocracy, the Al-Qaedas of the world.
Yeah.
But Libya had a third option. And the people in the government in Libya, the people who won the election, a free and fair election, are neither dictators nor radical Islamicists. They are that third group that we're trying to build up. The people, I would argue, began the revolution in Syria, began the revolution in Egypt, and are often squeezed out between these two groups that we don't like very much.
Yeah.
So I actually think Libya was the right thing to do. But so here's the thing. So you can't be on both sides. You can't condemn Obama for inaction and then argue we should not do anything, right? I mean, you gotta pick your side.
Well, I think we should do something.
What should we do?
No boots on the ground.
I agree.
I think we should take out any chemical weapon stockpiles. I think
with cruise missiles or bombs from planes.
And we need to articulate what it is that we want to happen, and if it doesn't happen, we should go in with cruise missiles.
Okay, I think that's what Obama's going to do. I mean, we'll see. We'll see. We're doing predictions here. It's a dangerous game.
I hope so.
I think within 2 weeks, probably less. Almost within a week, but it might take 2 weeks. But we will shoot cruise missiles on all the chemical weapons depots in Syria. If there are any factories, anything that we know about will be taken out. I think that will happen. I don't think that's enough, but I think that minimum will happen. Given Kerry's strong statement today,
Right.
It would be, I mean, I was worried that nothing was going to happen,
Right.
frankly, until I heard John Kerry today. I think that will happen, but I think that's the least that will happen. Would you stop there? Putting you on the spot.
I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to say what we're going to do or not going to do. I want to know what our goal is, and then we need to do what is necessary to reach our goal.
Well, let me give you some goals that I see here. One goal is absolutely humanitarian. More than 100,000 innocent people dead. These aren't fighters. This isn't a war zone. It's sad when soldiers are killed, but these are children.
Right.
These are men, women, and children gassed or exploded.
Right.
And that rivals the Rwandan genocide, which I also argue we should have done something then against Bill Clinton. I'm very consistent.
Yeah.
When I see mass murder,
Okay.
I want to stop it if I can. To me, maybe it's just it's a student of the Holocaust, a student of the Armenian genocide, Cambodia, Pol Pot. When I see mass murder, and there are liberals and conservatives that say America shouldn't be the policeman of the world, we shouldn't go in and stop mass murder, we have problems here at home, that's terrible, but that's somewhere else abroad. I have always believed, whether you can look at Nuremberg principles or the Convention Against Genocide, I believe that where possible, we can't stop if Russia started massacring a lot of people, or China, frankly, unfairly treating the Tibetans. We can't do anything about that. China's way too powerful. I have a lot of sympathy for Tibet. We can't do anything about that. But where we can go in and stop mass murder in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands particularly, I think we should. So before we get to any other thing, I want to just go with you with that humanitarian principle. There is a Convention Against Genocide, which I would argue makes it part of international law, but totally apart from international law, which isn't always what I want it to be. I would argue humanitarian. If we can stop hundreds of thousands of people from being murdered at relatively little cost to the United States, we should do so. I don't care what's happening in Africa, Asia, the Middle East, Mexico, wherever it's happening, we should do so. Do you agree with me?
No.
No. Okay. Tell me why.
Because I think that we should, when to do nothing will have a negative impact. For instance, in Syria, you have hundreds of thousands of people being killed. You have hundreds of thousands of people being pushed into these other countries, destabilizing the entire region. That is a threat to our security. So when you have something that could turn into a definite threat to American security, yes, you act. Are we going to be able to just run in anytime there's a dictator killing people, but it's not going to have any kind of U.S. impact? I think it's a terrible thing.
What about Rwanda? Didn't have much impact on the United States, but hundreds of thousands of people were being hacked to death. Should we have done something there?
You know what? If my son died in a war in Rwanda, I would say no.
All right. Fair enough. We're going to get back to more of this discussion. It's a tough discussion. It involves philosophy, religion. It involves how you think about America's role in the world. And let me say, there are plenty of liberals that agree with Chris Ullman on this one. Although I'm firm in my views. If you want to call and give us your views, you can too. 888-488-AMERICA.
She's had more than a dozen fractures. And in the next few years, she faces 2 major surgeries to strengthen her fragile bones. She's only 10 years old. Most people don't worry about fragile bones until late in life. For those with osteogenesis imperfecta, brittle bones are a concern throughout their lifetime. Find out how you can strengthen this child's future.
Diabetes is a killer. After I was diagnosed, I didn't feel sick, so I didn't listen to my doctor. Then it struck. I had a heart attack, then a stroke, and I was only 49.
Most people with diabetes also have high blood pressure and cholesterol, which can cause severe heart damage. In fact, 2 out of 3 people with diabetes die from heart disease or stroke.
Don't let diabetes destroy your life.
Call for your free diabetes survival guide. Choose to live.
again, the Inside Scoop, Virginia.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Mark Levine, talking about the very difficult question of what the United States policy should be in Syria with my guest, conservative commentator Chris Ullman. So, Chris, we've established that humanitarian reasons aren't enough for you alone. They are enough for me as long as it wouldn't lead to, a mass conflagration like we're trying. But if we can do it, they are enough for me. But let's talk about, because I think there are more than humanitarian concerns here, and there's some of the ones you mentioned. Syria borders 3 strong American allies, and I'm not including Iraq in that mix. Even though we just spent 10 years in Iraq with boots on the ground, it also borders Iraq. But the 3 strong allies are Israel, Jordan, and Turkey. Israel is our strongest ally in the Middle East. Turkey is a member of NATO. If Turkey is invaded, we are required by treaty to come in. And actually, Syria has sent some errant weapons already into Turkey, making Turkey very upset. Jordan is less stable, but is a very important small monarchy in the region. And the only other country that Syria borders is Lebanon, which is a complete mess and becoming part of the Syrian civil war. There are millions of refugees. To me, in addition to the humanitarian concerns, the central location of Syria and the fact that the people that are against the civilians, let's look who they are. I'll tell you, because in Egypt there's a difficulty. In Egypt we had a dictator harming his own people, but we supported that dictator. His name was Mubarak. It gets very complex in Egypt. In Syria, it's not so complex. Every single group supporting the government is an enemy of the United States. There's the Iranian dictatorship, where the people themselves actually revolted in the Green Revolution to try to get some freedom there. Russia is giving them arms on the ground. Iran and Russia are not good friends. Turkey, Israel, and Jordan are good friends. So to me, the geopolitical interests also suggest we need to do something more.
That's what I support.
Okay.
Because
so you don't buy the humanitarian argument, but you buy the geopolitical argument. I think they're both there, frankly.
Well, the humanitarian argument breaks down because you won't do anything to save the people being killed in China because they're too big. But true humanitarian means we go in no matter what to save people. Only when we can win.
Well, sure. I mean, I'll just give you an example. If people are drowning in a river, okay, and you can swim, you go in and you save them. That's the humanitarian thing to do. If you can't swim and they're drowning in a river, it would be idiotic to jump in the river to save them because you just end up drowning. So to me, I don't think it's inconsistent to say that we should do the humanitarian thing when it is possible for us to do so. In China, it's simply not possible. To me, that's like jumping in the river to save a drowning man when you can't swim. So I don't think I'm being inconsistent to say that I would help the Syrian people but not help the Tibetan people. So, all right. Let's talk about the way we go about things. Because one of the big arguments between Democrats and Republicans in recent years is Republicans saying the U.S. should go it alone. And it was Democrats saying we want multilateral, we want to work with other nations. If England and France want to help bear the burden, all the better. All the better for lots of reasons. For one thing, they're not bad militaries, not as good as ours, but they're not bad. They definitely spent a lot of time helping us in Libya. I think they did a very good job there. Go back to the war in Kosovo. And we didn't have the United Nations because Russia opposed us there too, but we had England, we had France, we had NATO. What's wrong with reaching out to England and France and asking them to bear their burden?
There's nothing wrong with that. And I support that. If we can get other people to help out, that basically just, if England will help out, now Cameron's in a little bit of a tight spot. He's really got to get some support from Parliament before he will do it. But Republicans and conservatives don't want to go it alone. But we believe in saying we will go it alone if our interests require it, versus saying we're not going to act no matter how much we should unless somebody comes with us.
Well, it depends on the situation. I mean, we were attacked on September 11th. Any president, Democrat or Republican, would go it alone if no one helped us. Turns out they did help us, which is great. But when it comes to that interest, Americans dying, I don't think you're going to see a difference.
And I don't even think that this president is waiting for England and France.
No,
I mean, at this point, he waited a whole year.
2 years, really.
Yeah, 2 years. And then he calls them up. And if he can get their support, wonderful, because of the message that it sends to Assad, to Iran, to Russia, that, hey, it's not just U.S. that's upset, but the world is looking at you. The world, the UN, has laws against these things. And we actually, as myself as a conservative, say, hey, you know what, UN, if chemical weapons are a no-no, then it's time to go in.
Let's talk about the United Nations, because I would be the first to admit the United Nations is an imperfect organization.
Yes.
That's being kind. After all, the General Assembly is still mostly run by dictators, and Security Council has a Russian veto. Imperfect though it is, I think it can be a useful tool, and one that is in our toolbox that we shouldn't just throw away. And in this particular case, I think it's a very useful tool, because the United Nations inspectors going in, searching for the chemical weapons, which we're sure were there, so we're not worried. It's not like Iraq where we didn't find anything. We're quite confident this happened. The UN inspectors are there. Syria is preventing the UN inspectors there. To me, that suggests the entire world, not just the United States, England, and France, but African nations, Asian nations, nations in the third world that aren't always pro-American, not the ones that are our eternal enemies like Iran or Cuba, but the ones who could go, India, for example, or Pakistan, ones that could go either way, that we are doing this for strong humanitarian reasons. Is there anything wrong with asking the UN to do exactly what President Obama has asked them to do here?
There's nothing wrong with it. The only thing that's wrong with it is when we fail to do what we should do because we're waiting for them to pass 15, 16, 17 resolutions.
I wouldn't wait very long. That's fair enough.
I mean,
I might wait a week, but I wouldn't wait much longer than a week.
I think conservatives don't like the UN, but it's because it is so ineffective that we can't wait. Sometimes we can, if we can get them on board, great, but Russia knows if they drag their feet, then the UN won't do anything.
And they've been dragging their feet for 2 years. I want to ask you about something else. You mentioned that Canberra needs the support of Parliament. I'm a big believer in my Constitution. You know that. I often pull it out of my pocket. The Constitution says that Congress should have the power to declare war. I believe that President Obama should go to Congress and ask for permission, and I think he'll get it. I think he'll get it. But I think he should go to Congress and get permission to take action. Now, it's hard. Congress is in recess. I don't know if he should call them back or not. That's a little tricky.
Maybe I think he absolutely should call them back. And I think they
we could
should
take action and get
come.
retroactive approval for it.
We've done
so you
that
think they would
before.
call him back out of recess and
I
say,
think he should.
Like FDR did after Pearl Harbor?
Absolutely. I mean, the problem with our Congress, Republicans and Democrats, is that nobody wants to follow the rules. Oh, we'll just give you approval after the fact. Why don't we just follow the document, Mark?
I'd be
Why
fine
don't
with
we
that.
see how much more respect our government and our Congress and the presidency gets if we actually follow the rules?
I'd be fine with that. And I do think before a major use of force, I think before a major use of force, we should follow this document.
Right.
Too many presidents of both parties have not done that.
Right.
And I understand there is an argument about an emergency if we have to act quickly. I get that argument. And I think that even if Obama uses cruise missiles in the next week, he should do it the right way. But even if he does that, I think he should within the next month get approval for all our actions and get a firm congressional stamp. So we agree on that.
Yeah.
Let me raise something else here, and this is the most difficult thing. And this is the thing that makes me lie awake at nights, and I support intervention. I support a no-fly zone. And that is that Al-Qaeda, which was not in the region 2 years ago in any significant extent, is there now. And it's weird to suggest an alliance with Al-Qaeda. It's so weird as to make me quiver a little bit. And yet, in this particular case, since Al-Qaeda is a Sunni terrorist organization, they are opposed to the Assad government as well. The concern is, and the concern of the people in the administration I've talked to is, that if we help the rebels too much, we might create an Al-Qaeda failed state there. I know, because I've talked with some of the Syrian free fighters, that there are lots of Syrians of goodwill who are not part of Al-Qaeda, who simply want to live in peace and freedom. The question is not, do they exist? I actually think it's pretty evident that the vast majority of the country. The question is whether they have power to do what I'm absolutely confident they want to do. And I think they could have done it 2 years ago. Today, it's a much more difficult situation. Given all these elements, other than the cruise missile attacks, would you stop there?
Would I partner with Al-Qaeda?
Well, would you go further? Would you arm the rebels, knowing that we arm the good guys, but some of those arms might be taken by Al-Qaeda? Would you do a no-fly zone, which I support because to me that's safer than giving arms that might end up to Al-Qaeda. Or if we just do the cruise missiles and we just take out the chemical weapons, and Assad continues to massacre his people without using chemical weapons. After all, 100,000 are dead from explosives, and maybe 1,500 are dead from chemical weapons. Wouldn't your party condemn, if President Obama only does the cruise missiles, and I think he may only do that, wouldn't they condemn him as being basically a pinprick that we really did very little harm?
Well, this is why those guys in the administration get paid the big bucks to figure out the strategy.
I didn't say it was an easy question.
Hey, and this is why we have to look at some of these. If we're arming the rebels, are we supporting Al-Qaeda? If we take out Assad and Al-Qaeda gets a stronghold there, that's a really bad thing.
Sure. But if Hezbollah's in charge and Iran's in charge, that's a really bad thing too.
Yes.
And frankly, I certainly have no love lost for Al-Qaeda, but I have no love lost for Hezbollah either. I don't want any terrorist group to get chemical weapons. I don't want any terrorist group to be in charge of a country, any anti-American terrorist group, whether it's Hezbollah or Al-Qaeda. So I've laid out my position. I support a no-fly zone. We both support the cruise missile attacks. Would you go further or would you stop there?
I think I'd have to stop for right now, just to see
just
what
do the
happens.
cruise missile attacks. I think we're going to do those. And then I think a number of people, liberals and conservatives, are going to call for more. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens.
Now, Americans, the polls show that they don't want to do anything.
Oh, my position's in the minority.
But you know why? But I think people don't understand.
I think that's right. You're right, the majority of Americans don't want intervention. Americans are quite understandably tired after Iraq, after Afghanistan.
Right.
But the polls also show that 50% of Americans can't place Syria on a map.
Right.
They actually showed the country Syria. They said, what country is that? And the majority of Americans had no idea what country it is. So at least Bush educated us. I would argue he lied to us about weapons of mass destruction. But he definitely went on TV with Condoleezza Rice and Colin Powell and made a case.
Right. And this president needs to do that.
The first time we've seen that was Secretary Kerry today. I predict in the next week we're going to be seeing a lot more of Secretary Kerry and even President Obama start to make the case. And he needs to make that case.
Why didn't Hillary make the case? Where was Hillary?
I think Obama shut Hillary down, honestly.
Oh, do you? Okay.
Well, the reports I've seen, and they're all inside the Beltway stuff, is that Hillary was making a strong case for intervention, that Biden was making a strong case for intervention, and that the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dempsey, was making a strong case for intervention, and Obama overruled them. That's what they say. I wasn't in those meetings, but that's what they say in the reports I've read. And I think it's because Obama is of the post-Iraq generation, and Hillary, Biden, and General Dempsey are maybe a little bit older and a little bit seen a little bit more.
Could see that if we do nothing, it might get worse, not better.
We should always remember when making any choices that nothing is a choice. There's this idea that if you ignore this problem and you stay over here, it'll go away. As long as we don't participate in it, that's childish thinking. I mean, that's the thinking
really
of a baby when you cover their eyes and they think you're gone.
Right, exactly.
It doesn't work that way. Doing nothing is a choice. I think we're changing. I've been advocating that for 2 years. I've been an optimist. I think we're changing. When we come back, let's find out if Congress is changing. I want to spend the last segment talking about whether or not your party wants to shut down the United States government. We'll be back with that question right after this.
Art, a universal language, an expression of culture, of self. And now, thanks to Empowered Women International, a way for emerging and established immigrant and refugee artists and artisans to find hope to earn a living while enriching the lives of all of us. Empowered Women International, making a better America every day. For more information on Empowered Women International's educational programs, or to make a tax-free donation, contact cfrip@aol.com.
Here, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty.
You'd think it would be easy to tell which kids have trouble with their eyesight. But that's not always the case. Even though 1 in 4 children may have a vision problem, eye doctors tell us the symptoms aren't always so obvious. We do know that 80% of all childhood learning is visual. And without good vision, kids can have trouble learning to read. And may fall behind in school. For clues on how to spot the real-life signs of childhood vision problems and what parents can do, visit checkyearly.com.
Here again, the Inside Scoop, Virginia.
Welcome back to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Mark Levine. This is the last segment if you want to join in. It's 888-488-MARK, 888-488-6275. So this is actually more foreign policy than I usually discuss on this show. I think it's very important because I think we're at a real turning point when it comes to Syria. Chris and I are much more used to arguing over domestic issues, and a real big one's coming because Congress is in recess. But there are a lot of people in your party, Chris, that argue that the Republican Party needs to shut the government down, ostensibly to try to prevent some elements of the Affordable Health Care Act, which your party calls Obamacare, from going into place, although they should know, if they're not idiots, that 95% of the health care proposal has nothing to do with the budget, so there's no way they can shut it down. The only thing they can do is I hate to say terrorist attack after talking about real terrorists, but basically saying, we're just not going to let the government run unless you repeal Obamacare. That would never work. It would make your party look horrible. My party would do very well in 2014, so I say, go do it. I oppose it, of course, but I think it'd be horrible for your party. What are your views?
Well, I actually don't agree with the strategy of shutting the whole government down. I do, of course, agree with being very vocal about what our problems are with the Affordable Care Act, with the exceptions and the delays in certain parts of it and not other parts of it. And I also support this year was the first year that we actually spent less than any previous year. And I do support that. And if we need to do things to get this president to continue to try to control out of control spending, to just put some things on it, that we need to do that. Of course, look, we need to make the case of why Obamacare is bad, why we need to be in the majority again, but shutting the government down, I think most Americans will not understand the kind of backroom, what we're trying to accomplish. Let's just get out there, say what we're opposed to, say that until we're in the majority, this kind of stuff's going to get funded. We're going to do everything in our power to keep government running and spending less, but not shut it down, because we can't win.
I think it'd be a horrible mistake on your party's part. It'd be horrible for America. As an American, I hope you don't shut the government down. As a Democrat, I say if you do,
right,
we're going to do better. So
please don't throw me in that briar patch.
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it's.
But now here's one of the things. I think Americans are very clear what Republicans are against. They're against Obamacare. We know they voted 60 odd times.
Right.
What do they support? I have not heard. What is the Republican health care plan? What's the conservative health care plan? Should people who don't have health care coverage be covered in America? Or should you, I don't know, die because you get a curable disease because you're too poor to afford it?
Oh, no.
What's the conservative plan?
I think that for those who can't afford it, there should be something. But what we're talking about is 15% of the American people who don't have health care are creating a new system for 100% of Americans. That just doesn't make any sense. What we need to do, and what Obamacare does not do, and what the conservatives need to do, is to put forth reforms that allow people to have control over their health care dollars, their health care spending, so they know where the money's going. Obamacare does just the opposite. No out-of-pocket expenses, and it removes.
There's deductibles. There's people still go on their own plans.
Not for so many things. There aren't. I mean, you pay your premiums, and then that's what all of Kathleen Sebelius' rules are about. There can't be any out-of-pocket expenses for birth control for 100% of Americans, not for low-income Americans, but for Bill Gates' wife.
You're buying a premium. You're buying insurance. This is covered under the plan.
And what is insurance, Mark? Insurance is to cover in case something happens that you can't afford. Insurance is not supposed to. Auto insurance does not pay for gas.
Not something you can't afford, for something that happens to you. That doesn't mean that I can't afford to fix my car if somebody bangs into it, but I buy insurance because it's a more expensive cost.
Right, but do you buy auto insurance to put gas in the tank every?
I don't.
And that's what Obamacare does. It says that your yearly physical things that we know are going to happen, not these unexpected expenses, but the things that we know we're going to need, we don't have to pay for anymore.
Here's the difference. If you have an annual physical every year, you're much less likely to have to undergo quintuple heart bypass surgery. You go in there, you get your heart drugs, you pay $100 a month, whatever it is, you take your heart medication, you don't have the heart surgery. If you don't take it and you don't do preventative measures and you don't pay for those and make them easy for people to do, then the person shows up in the emergency room, they have a heart attack, and then that costs $100,000 to give quintuple heart bypass surgery, which isn't very pleasant, I'm sure, when they cut into your cavity and you have a lesser chance of living. Preventative care is cheaper than emergency care. That's part of what Obamacare teaches us.
Well, I mean, are you saying that the top 1%, the top 10%, the top 20% of Americans cannot take any money out of their own pocket for that yearly expense?
Because they can't. I mean, you must oppose Medicare as well, because in Medicare we also provide for everyone over the age of 65, whether they're wealthy or poor, to get health care.
Well, but in our country today, with our fiscal situation, as liberals like to say, those who have more should be expected to not to be able to pay for some of these basic expenses.
They can pay. They can pay by filing their tax returns and paying for it.
When I go to the pediatrician and I don't have to pay for my child's yearly visit, and I find out how much my insurance company is being billed for those 15 minutes, I am outraged.
As well you should be. As well you should be, because insurance companies
be able to go in and say to the doctor, you know what, I'm going to pay you cash, and that's not going to cost my insurance company $500.
You know what happens if you try to do that? The doctor will charge you $2,000.
No
Because if you don't have insurance, they charge you even more. There's a wonderful article by Stephen Brill. Did you read that article in Time Magazine where he talks about the off-book costs? And while it's much more expensive even without the insurance?
Absolutely not. If we get doctors they can bill insurance companies, private insurance companies, anything they want. If they have to deal with people who have health savings accounts, who actually take the money and go and negotiate with the doctors, they get lower prices.
We don't have that power to negotiate.
We do. If we have health savings accounts, people do have that.
Here's the thing about healthcare. Yes, you might be able to negotiate an annual physical. But if you've got heart palpitations and you're in the emergency room and you're dying, you will take whatever.
Expense. That is what insurance is for, not the everyday things. That's what I'm arguing.
Right.
But my point is that insurance for the things that we need it for instead of covering everything.
Because if we make preventative care cheaper, we're going to actually reduce the need to go to the emergency room. That's the argument. And I would actually go further and say the best argument is companies are complaining about having to pay for all these things. Let's get rid of the insurance companies. Let's get rid of the companies. Let's do what 35 other nations do. Let's have universal health care. And you go to the doctor and you say, I'm an American citizen, and you choose your doctor, and they take care of you.
And it's all free.
And it's all paid for by your tax dollars. The same way, remember, in 35 nations, they all pay less than we do for health care, and all of them live longer than we do.
And they all
Not just France and Canada, but Costa Rica as well.
That's because a lot of them come here for their health care. Number one.
No, the sheikhs do, but not the ordinary French or Canadian or English citizen.
Look, Obamacare, and this is something Republicans need to say in the debate we need to have, is we know what Obamacare is about. Obamacare has a goal, and the goal is to do exactly what you said, to turn us over to a single-payer, government-run healthcare system.
Great.
And that is why Obamacare will cause our current healthcare system to fail. It was designed for that purpose. The ghost of Ted Kennedy, may he rest in peace wherever he is, was let's create something so completely outrageous that will destroy the United States healthcare system so that the government will have to step in.
Chris,
and that's where we are.
Has Medicare done that?
No, but Medicare does not cover every person in this country.
It covers everyone over 65 who's an
Everyone
American
over
citizen.
65.
Who do you think has the most healthcare problems?
And
I guarantee you the
know,
average 25-year-old does not have the healthcare problems of the average 75-year-old.
And the average 25-year-old is already paying for the 75-year-old.
That's right.
And
most Americans like Medicare. Most Americans, they don't call it Johnson Care, they actually call it Medicare, and they like it. The easiest way to fix the American healthcare system is just provide Medicare for all.
Mark, let me give you some advice as a friend. You're a young man. When you're old enough to get Medicare, there won't be Medicare
Yes, there
because
will.
our country will be bankrupt.
No.
And that is why we need to change things.
It'll be
because
there.
because two workers cannot pay for every one senior's thing. The system
How do the Canadians
will
do it?
collapse.
How do the French do it? The English,
They
the
wait
Japanese,
forever.
the Australians.
They wait
do
forever
not wait
and
forever.
cannot get the care they want.
They like
oh,
that
they
care.
do. I talk to people every day who have to either come over from Canada to get health care or their poor mother had to wait 6 months
You
for an
know what?
MRI.
I know people
Here,
in
my
America-
mother can go get an MRI if she wants.
I know Americans that have to wait 6 weeks. I'll tell you a friend of
Yeah,
mine in
because
America.
Medicare's falling apart.
No, I'm talking about young people. I'll tell you a friend of mine, she had to have hip surgery in the United States of America. She couldn't afford it, and her job didn't pay for it. She switched jobs, worked at another job that she hated, did it for more than a year while in constant pain just to get the health care to kick in to get the hip surgery. She got her hip surgery, quit the job, and now she's doing what she loves, which is being a teacher. Americans shouldn't have to do that. And in Canada, you don't have to wait a year for hip surgery like my friend had to do. You might have to wait 6 weeks.
No
There's a
way.
difference between 6
Oh.
weeks and a year.
No, you have to wait much longer.
We
than
got 2 minutes left. I want to raise one more
Okay.
issue with you. I know you want to cut government spending.
Yes.
All Republicans want to cut government spending, at least when a Democrat's in power. Maybe not when a Republican's in power. But I would argue this is the wrong time to cut. That austerity is a bad idea now. It can be a good idea. Bill Clinton, great times, end of the 90s, great time for austerity, absolutely. But in a time of relatively high unemployment still, low interest rates, low wages, now's the time we need to build bridges, we need a new deal, build infrastructure. Now's the time to spend.
We've been doing that for 5 years.
Very, very little. Most of it was tax cuts. Because
where
your
is
party
all
wanted
this?
tax cuts.
No, where is all this spending? Obama
Most of the
has
stimulus
spent
package was tax cuts because your party wanted that. About 1/6 of it
spending.
was
Tax cuts
infrastructure.
aren't spending. Okay, we're talking
Same
about
cost.
no. We're spending more and more. What we're doing
not.
is borrowing more and more.
We are actually,
absolutely.
domestic spending is way down under President Obama from the way it was in the recession. You just said that yourself, right?
No, I said that this year was the first year we actually spent less than any previous year.
13 was less than 2012, 12 was less than 11.
Because of
11
the
was less than 10.
sequester. Because of the sequester.
Which you're defending. Your party loves the sequester.
Absolutely, I'm defending the sequester. It was great because you know what? The world did not end. As Obama told us it would, it did not even inside the Beltway, did the world end.
It's the same thing with not asking for physicals. You say the world didn't end. If we don't retrofit our bridges, we may not notice it year to year to year until the whole thing collapses. If we don't rebuild our airports. You know, when I drive south in Virginia on that road to Woodbridge, I wait in traffic a very long time because we don't have money to fix those things. Infrastructure, can we at least agree on infrastructure? That's where the money should go.
Well, what happened to all our gasoline tax money? The
We
Transportation
should raise
Trust
that.
Fund.
It hasn't been raised in about 30 years.
Yeah, but what happened to all that money? Where is it?
It went to some infrastructure spending, but it's been a long time since that gasoline tax 30 years ago. It needs to go up. Chris, always an enjoyment to talk with you.
Great.
It was very interesting talking about Syria, where we kind of both got out of our element for a little bit.
It was wonderful. Thank you.
Folks, if you want to comment on tonight's show, just go to my website, go to marklevinetalk.com. By the way, you can also follow me on Twitter at marklevinetalk. Let us know what you thought of tonight's show. Thank you, Chris, for coming on again. Appreciate you.